Accordion scale buccal. What's the rumpus?
Welcome for another season and another episode of What's the Rumpus. My name is Michael Penn, and I have a guest which I'm very excited about. This is Chris Kirkland. He is one of the, how should we say, founders and geniuses behind Tokyo Cheapo, which is one of the businesses here, a very entrepreneurial business, which quickly has become a success. And we're going to ask him, we're going to pick his brain about tourism in Japan in particular, but I'm sure he'll have a lot to say. So how are you doing, Chris?
Excellent. Thanks for inviting me, Michael.
So thanks for coming to What's the Rumpus. It's been about 2 years since our last episode, so we're all feeling kind of nervous about getting started again.
Well, I hope I'll deliver the goods.
All right, excellent. Well, so first of all, let's find out a little bit about you. How is it that you got into this business that you're doing now, and what does it have to do with tourists?
So me and my co-founder Greg Lane, we were sitting in a cheap izakaya about 6 years ago, and we're chatting about new business ideas that we could do. Because both of us, I suppose, are entrepreneurs. We've had several businesses, and we were exchanging new ideas, and we were both like, well, no one's done a guide to Tokyo on the cheap. Let's give it a go.
So I guess the other stuff was mostly expensive.
Yeah, like most of the media at the time seemed to focus on how you could spend $300 on sushi, or $100 on a pizza, or something ridiculous like that. But we'd been living in Tokyo for quite a while, respectively, him much longer than me, and we'd kind of been, like the rest of us, getting by on a fairly modest budget. We knew that Tokyo wasn't that expensive, yet the world seemed to think that Tokyo was this stupidly expensive place. So we saw an opportunity, very easy to start a blog in 2012. So we just started writing some articles, and the rest is history, as they say.
All right. And of course, I've talked to you before about the origins of Tokyo Cheapo. That's another video, different series you can see on the Shingetsu News Agency YouTube channel and our webpage. But today we're here to talk about tourists. And so how does Tokyo Cheapo, in your experience, interact with inbound tourism in Japan right now?
So when we started it, originally we were thinking that it would probably be more for people moving here, expats living here. But our timing coincided almost exactly with this huge boost in incoming inbound tourists. So basically about 80% of our readers now are inbound tourists. They're either kind of researching a trip back home, or they're here kind of checking on their phone for stuff to do, places to eat, and just generally following our advice.
And do you have any sense of how many of these tourists are looking for like Japan on the cheap as opposed to 5-star restaurant Japan?
So as that McKinsey, there's a recent McKinsey report also mentioned 4 years after we originally came up with the idea, people are excited about Japan as a more budget-friendly destination, because everybody wants to work within a budget and nobody likes to overpay. So the idea that you can have this really kind of first-class experience, but it be a sort of economy pricing, no one's going to argue with that. So our demographics of our readers is quite broad. Kind of almost everybody reads the site. We do have articles about how to score a 5-star hotel on the cheap, or Michelin star restaurants with cheap lunch. But the general focus is helping people save money, and that seems to be checks everybody's box.
All right. Well, I know that as a starving journalist, that checks a very necessary box for me, right? All right. Well, so of course, I, as a resident of Japan, when I'm looking for events or looking to do some research about an area, Tokyo Cheapo is a site which I reach for probably one of the first.
Awesome.
I think that you guys do things with a lot more class and a lot more intelligent coverage than most of the other sites that I've seen. Let's talk now a little bit about how the Japanese are reacting to this massive inflow of tourists. I think 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about, wow, there might actually be 10 million tourists coming to Japan from other countries, and now we're up towards the 25 million range now, and the government in the next couple of years even is looking at 30 to 40, right?
Yeah.
Maybe for 2020's Olympic year in particular, they really want to boost it. So how are the Japanese dealing with this? Are they dealing with it well?
Well, I think there's many mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, this is one of the few places in the economy where there's real growth. I think, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, so I won't try and quote any, but there's definitely like a few percentage points of GDP in this industry, and it's just going up and up. But with that, brings these marauding hordes of foreigners who aren't necessarily used to the kind of delicate customs of Japan. And the locals do have mixed feelings about it. Not being Japanese myself and not really watching Japanese media, just anecdotally catching bits here and there, I don't feel confident to speak for the Japanese, but I do notice things like you have, every now and then on the news there's some kind of story about some faux pas a tourist has caused. Generally I think people are kind of realizing that, interacting with foreigners isn't as hard as they thought it would be. I don't know if you've noticed, like the amount of English that people speak to you, just, convenience store, somebody will say the price in English. That never happened when I first arrived.
That's right, yeah, there's definitely been cultural changes, particularly in the big cities.
So I get the sense that there's, overall it's kind of quite positive and people are sort of quite happy to welcome new people to their country.
Okay, well, we're calling this video, I believe, Communication with Tourists.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the point of this theme? Why is it something that it should attract our attention or be of note?
Because it's funny.
Okay.
I mean, we've all explored the hashtag English in our travels. So I think most the listeners will know what we're talking about, failures to use the English language properly, which are humorous. I kind of came with a few examples that maybe you're going to edit in with this, but I think my favourite one, let me just, let me read it rather than paraphrasing. I was on the Tokyo Metro the other day, and there's lots of rail passes in Japan, and there's one for Tokyo called the Greater Tokyo Pass, and this is a collaboration, I think, between all of the railways, JR, Metro, Toei.
Okay.
So it's a big deal, and they've got this nice big blue poster, all in English, and the headline for that is, "Let's play happily and exhaustively at the popular spot of the metropolitan area." So yeah, it's an interesting topic because the humour aside, it's like it's such a big growing industry, but it kind of points to why would such a rich developed country fail to produce basic copy? This metro example, there's billions and billions of dollars behind those companies. You'd have thought they could have at least pulled some English teacher out of a lesson for half an hour to fix it or something.
Okay, well that is a key issue, and that's one of the things that I think every foreigner who lives here for a while shakes their head about, is when the resources clearly are available, especially for big companies and for local governments, it doesn't seem like it would be very difficult for them to have a few native speakers on staff who just smooth out the English, and especially if they're going to put it out in public, they're going to represent Japan in this sense, especially with all these tourists coming. So what is your assessment of why they don't take grammar and spelling seriously in terms of public signs?
So I think there's several reasons. Perhaps a really obvious one is the inbound tourism industry is very new. I think before 2012, most of the tourism in Japan was domestic. So they were all just focused on what Japanese people like to do and communicating to them. So you've got to kind of be forgiving because it's a very new industry, so it's just not equipped. They don't have that sort of experience. Another thing, I think, is the way business operates in Japan, and that keeps out a lot of what would seem like common sense to us. A lot of the business happens between sort of friends and existing companies, and there's not really any of those companies set up to deal with tourists. So they just ask the people they know, and it's kind of like the blind sort of leading the blind, really. So there's all these consultancies popping up who are trying to sort of, cash in on this big wave of money going into the tourism industry. But even them, they don't seem to be exposing the truth, and it's very frustrating from our point of view, because it seems, you know, there's enough English speakers in Tokyo. Surely there would be like a roaring trade in hiring, you know, copywriters. But I think just because the way business operates, because it's sort of old-fashioned, hierarchical, and people just are used to doing business in their way with their friends, it's slow to change.
Well, that's points to some deeper issues, doesn't it? I mean, you know, is there any sort of way that you see to start to pull the Japanese business world and maybe the culture out of kind of its parochial mindset that it doesn't really matter. You can just find Ms. Tanaka over in the other department. She speaks English kind of well. Let's have her come and translate it, right?
So I was asked to, at a recent travel event we organised, I was asked on a panel discussion, if I had $1 billion, what would I spend it on to improve tourism in Japan? And I said, it's not about the money. I would just make sure I had more foreigners in sort of decision-making positions. I think, you know, so much will follow from that. So I think that's perhaps the first thing that needs to happen. It's like, because most of the decision makers are sort of older Japanese people, rather than like, you know, people who represent the demographic they're trying to do business with and reach and communicate to.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for our first episode of the second season of What's the Rumpus. We're hoping to do this basically each Monday night for at least a few months ahead. So we have lots of exciting guests in the pipeline. So please join us and be good.
What more can you say? What more can you say? What more can you say? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Got a on scale of buko. What's the rumpus? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Hey, da 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 ya. What's the rumpus? Caught on scale of buko. What's the rumpus?